They say that the greatest enemy of the human being is not what happens to him, but how he responds to it. What if the true origin of suffering was not in circumstances, but in the way we interact with the inevitable? Imagine for a moment that what hurts you does not come from the outside world, but of a silent battle within you, a constant resistance to accept what is already real. But two questions arise here that could change your way of seeing life. Is it possible to free yourself from emotional pain without changing circumstances? Could it be that your suffering does not have so much to do with what happens to you, but with how you fight against it? Throughout this content, we will respond to these concerns, and you will discover a principle as old and powerful. Resistance is the true fuel of suffering. Carl Jung expressed it forcefully. What you deny submits, what you accept transforms you. This is not only a deep thought, but a proven truth that transforms perception and existence itself. When we experience sadness, anger, or frustration for a loss, betrayal, or failure, those emotions are human, valid, and necessary. But when we reject what happened, when we repeat again and again in our mind that this should not have happened, we turn a natural wound into a mental prison. By the way, tell me something. Did you ever feel that pain tried to teach you something, but in the midst of suffering, it was almost impossible to understand it? Did you go through moments when you thought you could never, and yet you left stronger than ever? If these words are touching you, it is because this message is for you. And if all this makes sense to you so far, I invite you to like this video, you subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who also needs to hear this. That helps us a lot to continue sharing content that can really change lives. And since we are, tell me in the comments, what city are you seeing me? I would love to know how far this message is coming and who is connecting. Let's continue growing together, learning and transforming our pain in power. The desire to control each result, to force life to obey our rules, is what keeps us trapped. The more we try to modify the past from thought, the more we sink into endless suffering. The problem is not the loss itself, but the denial of its existence. So how is this cycle breaks? The key is in a practice that many confuse with weakness, but that is an immense way of inner strength, radical acceptance. It is not about surrendering or approving what happened. It is about stopping fighting the irreversible and directing that energy towards what is in our hands, the attitude, the answer, the present. Accept is not to settle. It is to recover power over the only thing we really control, our way of facing life, even when she does not fit our expectations. When you really open to accept what happened, something surprising happens. Suffering begins to lose strength. Not because pain dissolves immediately, but because you stop holding it with your constant resistance. Think of someone who lost his job. If that person clings to rage, frustration, or the idea that he was treated with injustice, he can spend years feeling victim, repeating the same story in his head. But if you choose to look straight ahead and ask, what can I build from this? At that moment, he takes control of his life. And that pain, which seemed unbearable, becomes impulse to evolve. It all depends on your way of interpreting the facts. Carl Jung talked about the power to integrate each experience, even the darkest. Because when the pain is faced with openness, instead of being rejected, it can become a guide and growth. One of the most common mistakes is to think that their own suffering is special, that no one understands what you are living. But pain is an essential part of human experience. We all feel it in different forms and moments. What makes the difference is the attitude towards that pain. Those who resist stagnate. Those who accept evolve. Healing really implies stopping fighting what has already happened. Accept the inevitable. Accept what you can no longer change, and focus your energy on what you can transform. There is something that almost nobody tells you. Most of the suffering that you have felt in your life did not come from the fact itself, but of how you held it with your thoughts. Did a link end and drag the pain for years? It wasn't just the breakup, it was your difficulty to release. Did anyone fail you? And you still can't forgive? It wasn't just the wound, it was your decision to maintain resentment. Did you lose something important and still anchored there? Maybe it was your attachment to what could have been. When you stop fighting with reality and decide to release that internal resistance, everything begins to change. The pain does not disappear immediately, but ceases to have power over you. And little by little, instead of being a burden, it becomes a teaching. And that's not all. In the next part, we will explore how your unconscious mind, without you noticing it, repeats the same pain patterns over and over again, because even if you understand where suffering comes from, it is essential to discover why you still fall into the same traps. And when you understand it, you will realize that your personal power is much greater than you never imagined. So keep seeing, because what you are about to discover can shake deeply. We will reveal how your mind has been trained to hold on to suffering, and most importantly, what to do to break that cycle once and for all. For a long time, they have made you believe that pain simply occurs, that it is an inevitable part of life. But that idea is a trap. The reality is much deeper. Without realizing it, you are repeating suffering yourself. And you don't do it because you want to be wrong, but because your subconscious is scheduled to stay there, stagnant in the same patterns, trapped in emotions that are recycled again and again. Carl Jung expressed it strongly. Until you do the unconscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it destiny. That means what you live is not a product of chance or an external force that wants to see you fall. It is not the universe against you. It is an internal program that makes you repeat again and again. The same as you learned without even realizing. Your subconscious acts as an automatic system that's settled from your childhood. If in your environment you learned that love comes with pain, that abandonment is normal, or that life always brings struggle and deficiencies, then your mind recorded those ideas as absolute truths. And here is the detail that almost nobody understands. Your mind does not look for what does well, look for what is familiar to you. Therefore, even if you want to stop suffering, a part of you continues to attract the same. Relationships that hurt you, situations that are repeated, decisions that sabotage you. Have you realized that you always end up with people who hurt you? Notes that every time something good appears, somehow you lose it? That is not bad luck. It is your unconscious creating the same scenario again and again because it knows no other. And then a painful question arises: why do you keep choosing what destroys you? If as a child you associated affection with abandonment, today, even if you don't want to, you will unconsciously seek that same pattern. If your story was marked by rejection or humiliation, today you may avoid opportunities, your talent streets, or stay in places that annul you, all for fear of feeling the same again. This is how emotional auto is activated. You are confined to the known, even if that implies continuing to hurt you. And worst of all, if you do not make this mechanism aware, you will repeat it throughout your life, believing that it is your destiny. People say, the same people always touch me. Life never changes, but it is not life. It's you. It is that hidden program within you, reproducing without stopping. And the big question is, how to break that invisible cycle. Precisely that is what you are about to discover. And when you do, you will see that the power to transform everything was always in your hands. You cannot transform what remains hidden. If you really yearn to put an end to the emotional pain cycle, the first step is to recognize the pattern you have been living without realizing it. For that, ask yourself key questions. What has been the emotion that my life has marked the most? Is abandonment, rejection, betrayal, frustration, or fear repeat? What kind of relationships or circumstances tend to repeat constantly? What ideas about me and life are sustaining this suffering? When you respond sincerity, something deep is revealed. The pain you have been carrying for some time does not come from the outside world. It is an internal experience that reproduces again and again, unconsciously, in every aspect of your life. And it is precisely at that moment when everything can begin to transform. Overcoming emotional suffering does not mean that you will stop feeling sadness or pain. It means that you will no longer be a slave to a hidden pattern that dominates your behavior without knowing it. Because by becoming aware of what was previously operating in the shadow, you stop being a victim of your programming. Suffering is not inevitable. It is the unconscious repetition that perpetuates it. From that moment on, you can start acting with intention instead of reacting by habit. But there is something else you need to understand, because without this, you could fall into the usual trap, the role of the ego. In the next part, you will see clearly how that internal voice, which seems to protect yourself, actually maintains the cycle of suffering and progress, and it is crucial to deactivate it before it continues to interfere with your healing. Because only when you understand how the ego holds pain is that you really start freeing yourself. The ego, without perceiving it, feeds on your suffering. You need to remain trapped in it to survive. That part of you that justifies your pain, which insists that the world has failed you, that expects others to change so you can heal. That is the voice of the ego. But the toughest truth is this: the ego does not want your healing. Because if you stop suffering, he loses his reason for being. Carl Jung clearly said it: the mind that originates the problem is not able to offer the solution. And that mind is precisely the ego, which built your emotional prison from the beginning. If you try to heal using that same logic, you will only reinforce the chains. And how does that sabotage act? It does not do it evident. The ego does not tell you that you are still suffering, but it is convinced that you have valid reasons to remain injured. He clings to the past, repeats the painful scenes, reminds you who hurt you, and makes you believe that when you revive it, you will regain control. But that control is an illusion. And as long as you continue inside it, the pain will continue to repeat. Without realizing it, you begin to turn your pain into a kind of identity. What at first was just a painful experience, it ends up being the way you define yourself to the world. And the most dangerous, also before yourself. You begin to say things like, "I am always the one that ends alone," or "everyone fails," as if it were a universal law written only for you. But it is not so. It is the ego disguised as a victim, whispering in the ear that the problem is out, that the fault belongs to others, of life, of destiny, and you believe it. It makes you think that to feel good, something outside needs to change. That is the big trap, to be waiting for an external miracle while the ego feeds on your complaints and scars that never heal, because he himself is responsible for keeping them open. This is one of his most silent strategies, the role of victim, a position that seems to protect you, but that deep down only takes power. He tells you that nothing is in your hands, that you are a passive spectator of what happens to you. And while you believe that, you do nothing to transform your story. That is just what the ego wants, that you do not get up, that you are still there, weak, wounded, motionless. But here is a truth that can bother. Nobody is going to arrive to fix everything. No matter how much you suffer or how many times signs with your finger, the only person who can change the script is you. And where to start? Recognizing that you are not that inner voice that insists on reminding you of your wounds, nor is it your past or the pain you lived. The ego wants you to believe that you are, because it is what keeps it alive. But when you stop feeding it, it loses strength. There are 3 ways to start freeing you from your control. The first, start observing your thoughts without taking them as absolute truths. If an internal voice appears saying that everything is wrong, look at it with distance. It is not you, it's just a mental habit talking. The second, ceases to repeat the story that hurts you. Every time you revive what happened, you get closer to pain. Ask yourself, does this strengthens me or weakens me? If you take power, let it. You have the ability to write a different story. Do the opposite of what the ego expects from you. He wants to see you react, alter you, be tied to the same emotion over and over again. But when you decide to act from calm, without attachment, with genuine acceptance, that pattern breaks. Your control weakens. And when you manage to observe the ego without identifying with him, something powerful happens. No longer dominates your decisions. You don't hold the past anymore. You stop looking for approval outside. You stop seeing yourself as a constant victim of everything that happens. And it is at that moment when you understand something deeply revealing. The suffering was not born of what you lived, but of how your mind interpreted it. The pain existed, but it was the story that you built around him that kept you in an invisible prison. And now, it is time to take the next step. Discover a shocking truth about the emotional healing process. Relief does not appear fighting pain, but changing the way you welcome it. And understanding this, you will notice that healing is not a distant goal, but a process that you can start at this moment. Fourth key, stop resisting pain. What you resist stays. Since children, they taught us to hide our emotions. We listen to phrases such as, "Don't cry, you have to be strong, that's not so important." We learned to flee from discomfort instead of listening and understanding it. But no one explained that the more you try to suppress what you feel, the more it intensifies. What you don't want to look becomes deeper. The more you deny the pain, the more it is rooted inside you, in your body, in your subconscious. Carl Jung said it clearly. The light is not reached imagining the positive, but becoming aware of one's dark. That is, you cannot heal ignoring your wounds, but facing them honestly. And there begins the destructive cycle of resisting what you feel. Think about it. When someone pushes you, your immediate reaction is to push back. The same thing happens with your emotions. When sadness, anguish, or anguish appear and you repress them, you give them more space to grow. You forces you to appear that everything is fine, although you know that it is not true. But the pain has not gone. He has only learned to hide in the deepest of your being. And you, without realizing it, try to silence it with distractions. You give yourself to work. You miss on the cell phone screen. You immerse yourself in social networks, in anything that moves you away from that silent emptiness that appears when everything is calm. However, when you are yourself, without distractions, everything comes back and returns with more intensity. Then you start looking responsible. Your mind is convinced that the origin of suffering is outside, in whom he betrayed you, in the injustice of your history, in everything that did not go as you imagined. But as long as you continue to point out, you move away from the only way that can really heal. Look in. It is here where so many are trapped in a wheel that turns endless. It is not the pain that destroys you, but the constant struggle to avoid it. Resistance is what becomes unbearable, what in essence just needed to be felt. Accepting pain may seem a contradiction, but it is the most liberating act you can practice. It is not about resigning or surrendering, but about stopping fleeing. Stop wanting to control what you feel. If there is sadness, feel it. If anger appears, don't hide it. It is not necessary to act with rage. It only allows that emotion to exist within you without judgment. And that is where the unexpected happens. When you do not run away, when not forces, when you do not repress, pain loses strength. Because what does not resist transforms. It is a simple and powerful truth. Everything changes. Nothing remains the same forever. That is one of the deepest teachings you can hug, impermanence. Carl Jung said it clearly. The transformation occurs inside at the time we stop clinging. Neither joy is eternal, nor is suffering. Everything that once seemed unbearable at some point also happened, and what you feel like an abyss now will also happen. When you stop fighting what you feel and simply inhabit it, pain becomes a teacher. You are no longer a victim. You are no longer caught. You start walking with a new consciousness, because it is not the emotion that chains you, but your relationship with her. And by accepting what you feel without trying to change it, you give yourself permission to be free again. Direct your attention to the body. When anxiety, sadness, or anger appear, do not get caught in mental noise. Instead of repeating thoughts as, "This should not be happening," lead your conscience to the physical. Ask yourself, in what part of the body I feel this emotion? Does it manifest as chest pressure, tension on the shoulders, or a knot in the stomach? Do not try to analyze or reject it. Simply watch it and breathe inside it. Instead of resisting its rigidity, it allows your breathing to create space for emotion to flow. You don't need to solve anything immediately. It only remains present, inhabiting what you are feeling. That is where something deeply liberating happens. You realize that pain has no dominance over you, not because it disappears in a magical way, but because you stop being subject to him. When you are no longer a slave to resistance, something changes deeply. You are no longer a victim dragged by your emotions, but someone who can cross them with clarity and maturity. True power arises when you accept what it is instead of fighting it. While many spend their lives fleeing from suffering, without noticing to escape it makes it bigger, you can choose another path. And when you do, when you decide to look straight ahead, stay with what bothers without judgment, you discover a transformative truth. Pain does not come to destroy you, but to help you wake up. In the next step, we will see how that same pain can become your greatest strength. Because once you stop fighting it, you can transform it into a personal evolution engine. And when you manage to do this, you understand that healing is not just possible, it is an inevitable destiny. Carl Jung understood him with a mastery when talking about the interior alchemy process. While the ancient alchemists sought to turn lead into gold, he understood that real lead is human pain, our traumas and fears, and that true gold is the conscience that is born when we use that suffering to grow. The question then is no longer, how do I avoid pain? But how do I become my ally to transform me? Because the wisest people did not arrive there because they had an easy life, but because they walked through the fire without closing learning. Each wound, every shadow, can be the portal towards a stronger, awake and free version of yourself. Jung described the concept of the dark night of the soul as that period in which the human being faces his deepest pain, an intense and lonely journey where everything seems to collapse. It is when one believes to have reached the limit, where anguish becomes almost unbearable. However, if instead of resisting or escaping, the question arises, what do you want to teach me this? Or, how can I use this suffering to evolve? Something changes. At that moment, the victim gives way to the creator, and suffering ceases to be ruin to become a foundation. From the fall, the Renaissance is born. Every time we face losses, disappointments, or betrayals, something within us dies. But that death is not the end, but the elimination of illusions, of the false image of who we thought were. It is the rupture of an identity that no longer represents us. After that fracture, the opportunity to rebuild us with more firmness and authenticity appears. It is enough to review the crucial moments of your life to realize that true growth rarely comes from joy, and almost always from pain surpassed. The transformation is not soft. It destroys certainties. It forces us to confront parts of ourselves that we avoided looking. It leaves us naked in front of what we denied. And there the choice appears: stay trapped or take the next step. Strength is not to avoid pain, but to turn it into the raw material of a new version of you. So how to use that suffering as a source of force? The first step is to change the perspective. Pain does not have to be seen as a punishment. It can be the beginning of a process. Those who cling to the idea of injustice end up trapped in bitterness. But those who understand that every challenge hides a teaching, they leave more prepared than ever. Instead of asking, "Why me?" try with, "What do you want to show me life now?" Then, transform your story into power. There are people who cross the worst scenarios, recreations, betrayals, losses, and still built something bigger from that. Who were underestimated, learned to trust themselves, Those who touched background discovered an inner force that they had never imagined. Your story is only yours, but the sense that you give it is a choice that only you can do. And finally, use what hurt as impulse. The pain can paralyze or can take you further than you ever thought. If someone hurt you, do not poison with resentment. Use that to build something better. If life knocked you down, get up and show that there is power to move forward. If an absence left you empty, it fills that space with a purpose that transcends pain. The real decision is not in what happens to you, but in what you do with it. The people who have reached the highest success levels did not do it because they lived without pain, but because they were able to transform that suffering into impulse. That is the real test. Turn the wound into wisdom. When you go through a painful experience and decide to learn from it, something deep changes in you. You begin to free yourself from everything that before it stopped you. You no longer react with the same intensity to criticism or alien negativity because you acknowledge that each person reflects their inner world. You stop fearing the falls because you know you can get up with more force than before. Your presence becomes firm, authentic, because you have touched the darkness and still you lit your own light. That process is what Jung described as individuation, the path to authenticity when you dispossess the superficial of the masks of the need for external validation. It is the point where pain ceases to have power over you because you no longer load it like a cross, but you recognize it as a teacher. And at that time, you discover a great truth. Suffering did not weaken you, it made you more resistant than ever. Now it's your turn to decide. You already have the information, you already understood the message. Pain is not an enemy to avoid, but a door towards your deepest growth. There are only two paths: to remain caught in suffering with resentment and victimism, or use that same pain as fuel to become someone more wise, stronger, freer. Only one of those roads leads you to break your own chains. So tell me, what path do you choose? Write it into the comments. I transform my pain into force. If you are ready to stop fleeing suffering and start using each challenge as an opportunity to raise you, you will discover that nothing can stop. Finally, today you have a real choice before you. You can continue allowing the pain to handle your life, to turn off your brightness, to limit your potential. Or you can do what very few dare to do, convert that same pain in the fire that forges your transformation. As Carl Jung said, there is no awakening without having descended to the abyss. Now that you understand it, you can't ignore it anymore. What you will do with this truth only depends on you. The suffering stops governing you at the moment you decide to take the reins of your history, when you stop seeing yourself as a victim and start transforming each wound into impulse, in learning, in renaissance. There you understand that each blow was not a conviction, but an invitation when awakening. Pain loses its domain when you stop resisting it and hugs it as part of your evolution. When observing it with other eyes, it ceases to be a weight and becomes your greatest ally. Tell me in the comments, are you ready to turn your pain in power? Only those who dare to face their shadow can really lead their life. If you are reading this, it is because you already gave the first step. Because there is a voice within you that does not accept to continue stagnant, that cries out for change, for freedom. But remember, this is not the end, but just the threshold of a new stage. If any part of this message touched something inside you, if, as you listened, you felt that we talked directly to your heart, then don't ignore it. Have you ever felt trapped in a pain cycle that seemed impossible to leave? Have you ever used that suffering as an engine to grow, to change, to become someone stronger? I would love to know your story, what you have lived, what you learned, because this channel is not just to talk to you, it is to build a real space for transformation together. Leave me a comment by telling me from which city you are seeing us, and if any of today's ideas made sense to you. Your experience can inspire other people who are also fighting in silence. And if this content gave you something valuable, I ask you with love that you subscribe to the channel, you like the video, and share it with someone who also needs to hear this. Remember, sometimes a single word arrives at the exact moment to change everything. See you in the next video.